So, and I'll show you as we proceed a little more formal way of schematizing that, because when you're reading Piaget you might ask, well, at what point does assimilation become accommodation? And the answer that I just provided, which I hope is reasonably comprehensible, is the best I can provide. Here's a more concrete way of looking at it. You're a pre-med student, or let's do pre-law, because let's pick on the pre-law students instead. You're a pre-law student, so you can imagine that there's assumptions that go into that. Think about them all. You're reasonably intelligent, you're reasonably verbally intelligent, you're going to do well on the LSAT. There's going to be a career as a lawyer waiting for you if you do well. Being a lawyer is a perfectly valid way of being in the world from a moral and practical perspective. Being a lawyer is better than any other way of being in the world, because for you anyways, because otherwise why wouldn't you pick that? Okay, so those are pretty fundamental assumptions, and then you can think, well, how much of your schema do they underlie? Well, your judgment about your intelligence, and let's say also your relative ability, because you know, ability isn't only intelligence. That's a big one, right? You bring that with you pretty much wherever you go. There may be some domains where you think, well, I'm not as smart as I could be there, but it's usually quite a general assumption. And so let's say you write the LSAT and you just bomb out. It's like, looks like you're not as smart as you thought you were. And so then what do you do about that? Well, it's rough, because not only do you have to reconstitute your vision of the future, but you have to reconstitute your vision of the present and the past. All those times that you thought you were so smart, turns out you weren't. So you can see that that's because those presuppositions are so fundamental that disrupting them is going to produce a fair degree of negative emotion. So, and you can tell from this diagram, you imagine that when you're moving forward from point A to point B, there are obstacles that you can encounter that you know of, and you can just put a detour in place, or there are obstacles that emerge that you have no idea how to conceptualize whatsoever. That often happens to people if they develop the symptoms of a very serious disease, or if someone they love develops the symptoms of a very serious disease. Because not only are you not going where you thought you were with the person that you thought you were going, but you don't know what's going to happen in the interim, so it's very, very difficult to accommodate to that. And so one of the things I think that Piaget missed, at least to some degree, is that there's often catastrophic discontinuities in the stage progression. You know, and he was looking at little kids and how they put their cognitive schema together, and generally they're not completely distraught and destroyed by the necessity for transformation in the purely cognitive realm. But, well, I think I told you my nephew's dream about the dragon. Did I tell you that? Yeah, okay, so he was going through a stage transition at that point because, well, there were two things happening. One was that he was going off to kindergarten, that's a big deal, and then there was some instability in his family. And so he had to figure out how to cope with both of those, and one of the ways of coping was to become more of an individual. And his dream, first of all, laid out for him the problem. The problem was, there were problems. Those are all the little bitey things that were jumping up on him. They're problems. But that's not the problem. The problem is that the problems keep coming. So not only are there problems, but there's an indefinite number of them, and there's something that generates them. It's like the Hydra. You remember the Hydra in ancient mythology? It's got 7 heads. You cut off one head, 7 more heads grow. It's like, that's life. So, you know, what do you do under those situations? And he had this symbolic notion first in the dream, although I triggered that with my questions, which was, well, you go right for the source of the problems, and you do something about that. Now, part of the reason that Piaget thought that the study of knowledge was best construed as the study of the acquisition of knowledge is because you could say, well, here's a situation, do you know what to do? And you say, yes. I say, great. No problem in that situation. But then I could say, here's a situation, and you don't know what to do. Well, that's a problem, but that's also the problem of life. And so what's the solution to the set of problems that you have no answer to? And the answer to that is assimilation and accommodation. Exploration, assimilation, and accommodation. Now, when the little guy in the dream went down the dragon's throat, he went to where the fire came out, and you can imagine that if a dragon is belching fire and smoke and that's turning into little, beat demons, that the firebox, which is a place of transformation, seems to be the core of the problem. Well, he went to the core of the problem and he cut part of it out, and then he used that as a shield. Now, it's a brilliant solution, because basically what it proposes is that there's enough information in the world, and you're a good enough information processor, so that if you use all the information that's lying latent in the world against the set of all possible problems, it will work. And I would say, we have lots of clinical evidence that that's the case, because one of the things we do for people in clinical psychology all the time is, well, they have a problem, we unpack it into the things that are stopping them that they don't think they can master, and then we put them in a situation where they're asked to develop mastery over just those situations. And it works. And if you do an analysis of why it works, it's not exactly that they become less afraid. So let's say somebody's agoraphobic and they don't want to go in an elevator, and you teach them to go into the elevator. You might say, well, they're less afraid of the elevator. But it's not exactly right. What they are is more confident in their ability to be the sort of creature that can overcome fears and prevail, and therefore go in the elevator. So instead of the world getting less dangerous, they get braver, which is a much better solution, because the world is just not going to get any less dangerous. So the knowledge acquisition process is explore in the face of novelty. And the novelty is, technically, when you lay out something that you think you know and something else happens instead. So